I settled on this lighting because it reminds me of Mountain Dew Baja Blast. If you know, you know. But this video today I'm doing is about the 3 ways you can utilize resident managers. If you have an apartment building with a resident manager, it's very likely that your resident manager gets a rent credit and you don't have them do anything. But if you have a resident manager there to do the job of resident managing, here are 3 things that you should be using your resident manager for and delegating stuff to that will greatly help you out. I just want to preface this. The resident manager is more or less your eyes and ears for your building. They are usually the liaison between you and the tenants. Now, if you have a property management company or you are a property management company, the resident manager is kind of there to help you with a few things. But typically, I feel like resident manager underutilized. The one thing that resident managers are great for are tenant relations. The resident manager is the point of contact. When tenants move in or tenants are there, they know which unit is the resident manager's unit. So the resident manager typically is the first person to greet someone in the building. They're usually the ones that move in the tenants. So they can handle the move-ins, they can take the move-in photos, they can go through the move-in checklist and itemize those things. And they're the ones, at the end who can do the move-outs and take the move-out photos and go through the checklist. So that's very helpful for you, especially if you don't have a management company, maybe you self-manage, the resident manager's there and they can do that. Another thing is they receive tenant concerns and they can relay them. So if there's an issue going on, the tenant can hear it from them and relay it to the office or relay it to you. So this helps a lot of the times if the management companies have managed a lot of buildings, and sometimes tenants aren't tech savvy or don't know how or want to go contact management. They can contact the resident manager. Another thing is if a landlord is like a mom and pop and they self-manage, the resident manager helps kind of filter through that. They can tell the resident manager can tell you. So they kind of act a little bit as like the pseudo property manager. The next thing is they can coordinate in the event of emergency. So they're usually the ones that's on site. So if there's some sort of after hour emergency or during day emergency, they can be the one who receives the calls. They can be the ones who meet either the police, the fire department, something like that, or can coordinate and help make tenants feel at ease in the event that there's an emergency. Of course, taking precautions that they're safe as well. And they also can update tenants on changes. There might be some new rules, new policies, new updates, things like that. They can relay that. They can give all the tenants maybe the postings, and they can discuss it and let the tenants know. Another thing is our resident managers can do is help with lease enforcement. So lease enforcement is extremely vital. I'm pretty sure I have 1 or 2 videos on my channel about lease enforcement, so you might want to check those out. But for the resident manager, they're the one who can usually deliver the tenant write-ups. Resident managers are usually the one who know about lease violations, by the way. They typically are the ones that call you and go, yo, they are supposed to only have 1 dog. They now have 5. Resident manager tends to be the one who knows these things. So they're the ones who can write up the tenants. If the tenant is creating noise problems, they're littering, they have unauthorized animals, et cetera, et cetera. The resident manager is the one who can write them up and post the notice and give the write-up to the tenants. If you have a security camera system, I strongly encourage that you give tenants access to it because they're the ones who can also pull the footage and go, hey, on this day at this time, per the footage, you did this thing that you weren't supposed to. So they're great for that. Again, they can serve notices if there's notices for entry, notices to perform, notices to pay, rent increase notices, anything like that. The resident manager can serve them. So post them on the door or hand give them to tenants because they're, a familiar face. They also tend to be good at kind of tracking the ins and outs of guests. Resident managers, when you have one, you tend to give them, here's the rent roll and here's the authorized occupants. So they have an idea who should be coming and going in the building. And if they see people that are staying beyond what they should be staying, that are guests, but now we're not leaving, then they can report back to you and say, hey, I feel like this person might have moved someone in, or I saw them move someone in. Do you know about that? Because sometimes they do. Maybe the landlord goes, yeah. Usually if someone's gonna move in, you would tell the resident manager, hey, just to let you know, someone's moving into this unit, there's gonna be an additional occupant. Then the resident manager can keep track of that. But if they have a list and you go, hey, there's people here that I think are moving in, are they authorized? And you go, no, then that can be lease enforcement. That can be addressed right away by you, maybe by your eviction attorney, by the management company. They also can keep track of like abuses in the sense that maybe a tenant's abusing the trash, maybe they're not, they're contaminating, like let's say the recycling bin, they're putting trash in the recycling bin that they're not supposed to. Sometimes resident managers tend to know who's doing that. Maybe tenants are littering, maybe tenants are not being respectful of other units, maybe they're, leaving things out in the courtyard they're not supposed to, et cetera, et cetera. Resident managers can keep track of that and address it. And a lot of the times, if a tenant does something wrong, the resident manager can address it once, and the tenant tends to be like chill, like, oh, okay, I'm sorry I didn't know I couldn't do that. But it's a tenant to tenant thing. So, as a tenant, you go, hey, just letting you know, you did this thing, or hey, you're not supposed to put trash in the blue bin. It needs to go in the black bin, the blue bin specifically for these things. I just don't want you to get in trouble. The tenant can kind of have that like, hey, we're both tenant to tenant thing, and diffuse situations. Once manager get involved, it sets a very different tone. So a lot of things can be curbed like at the outset, especially for new tenants, if the resident manager approaches them and goes, hey, I want to remind you, like, we can't do that. And they might go, okay, no, my bad, apologies. And they also can keep track of the parking. So if you have assigned parking at your building, you just give the tenant or the resident manager the parking assignment, and they'll go, hey, and they keep track of the cars. Did you get a new car? Okay, I got to make sure and that's really for the safety of everybody, is making sure that the right people are parking in the building. So the last thing that resident managers are great for delegating is kind of administrative things. So if you don't have like an online portal or a way for tenants to pay rent, some sort of electronic means, they can be the rent collector. So they'll collect the rents and they'll give the tenant the receipt. Okay, you've paid, here's your money order. Here's the money order number. It was for, $1,000. Here's your receipt. So they can collect the rents and itemize them. And then they usually tell you, hey, I collected rents from all these units, but this one and this one didn't give me rent money, by the way. They can also enforce the late fees. So they can go and remind tenants, hey, I see you haven't paid rent. You're going to get a late fee if you don't pay it, today. Then they help with like the rent collection process. Posting notices, which I talked about in the last section, the lease enforcement section, but they can post notices. They can also do regular inspections of the property. So I've done quite a few videos, and I'm a huge proponent of as much as you can. I know it's really hard, but try to keep, aware of maintenance things on site, preventative maintenance. You can give the tenant, or the resident manager a checklist, and they can check the property, maybe do inspections of units. So instead of having yourself or maybe the management company, maybe the resident manager can, go have the task of checking for the units. Unless you tell them what they need to be checking for, they're not going to be good for that. So if you don't have the energy to do that, or you don't want to put that on them, you can at least give them something to regularly check for on the exterior of the property. Like, hey, make sure that there's no trash, make sure that, there's no tripping hazards. Let us know if any part of the landscaping is dying, or if anything is leaking, or if, there's puddles or something. They're good at checking those kinds of things. Does the roof look okay, or do the gutters seem like they're blocked? Stuff like that, because then you can address it. And if they're checking like monthly, that's really helpful for you, because you could catch something like, yeah, the gutters I think might be blocked. You can clean that out before the next rain season. The last, of this administrative part is they can help with coordinating vendors and entry. So a lot of the times tenants, not that you have to comply with it, but sometimes they feel more comfortable if they're home when repairs are being done, or they want someone familiar, like maybe they'll have like a family member be present when you have a vendor in there. Sometimes the resident manager, because the tenants are familiar with them, the resident manager can be present and allow entry for the coordinator, or for the vendor, coordinate that entry. Or if the vendor needs to get into the property, they don't have keys, they can let them in, or they can coordinate, hey, here's the code, here's maybe a lockbox so you can get in. So they're really good with that. They can, go, hey, here's the problem, just letting you know, we're having a leak here, and, point them. So the resident manager can help a lot with that. So there's a handful of things that I feel like resident managers, since they're on site, can do. One of the trickiest things, though, is I understand resident managers have day jobs. Some people work really long hours and they can't get to all these things. But keep in mind, the whole point of the resident manager is they're getting a rent credit or a unit in exchange for helping you. So if they're not going to help, or they're not willing to help, they might not be a good fit as a resident manager, and this might not be the position for them. But there's definitely things that resident managers can help with. And if you have one, you might want to, help them. You might want to provide them maybe a computer, or at least a printer, so they can print out notices and serve them, and come up with some sort of training with them. A list. Always, if you have a resident manager and you have the agreement, which in California you're required to have a list of job duties of what they're expected to do. Obviously, obviously be mindful that they do have lives, they do have jobs, but that they do have this responsibility. That's why they're, again, getting the rent credit. So if you liked this video, you might also like a video that I did a while back, but it was, being careful making resident managers also handymen. So I did a video on that. It's a little interesting, a little bit different take on the resident manager situation. I also have a weekly newsletter. So if you want, there's a link below. You can sign up for that every Sunday. I send a newsletter to help landlords, has local news, tips, things of that nature. And lastly, if this was helpful, you can like it, you can subscribe to the channel, then you'll always know when these videos are coming out. Post them once a week. So that being said, thank you for checking this one out, and I will see you in the next one.